It's been a while since I forgot to unmute the microphone, so I thought I'd give you a classic throwback hit there. Hello, let's do that again. Hello, and welcome to Bestiary Broadcasting, where we're doing an extra stream this week. It's fiddly. This was kind of intended to be the Tuesday night stream, but then I did a vote for the on Patreon for people to vote what I should do, and the one that came through kind of worked better as a Tuesday night stream. We did a read through of the Spire RPG, but I thought instead today it'd be cool to. I've been getting a bit reflective because it's been kind of we've got a lot of people. Hello everyone. I've been getting quite reflective because it's been like a year since I've been working on RPGs full time, and ironically a large chunk of that time has been spent on miniature stuff rather than RPGs. But it got me looking back at like some of my early designs and thinking, well, is there anything here that I can kind of bring back and anything I can look at? And the first ever RPG that there were lots of things that I messed around with, but the first one that I kind of got to a somewhat, I don't want to say finished, but like a whole thing that could be played, was a game called Inheritance. It's even got a logo. I can't remember how I got this logo. This was done originally, it's even called a Suga Games project, which is a real throwback. It's the old name of the blog. I can't help but like edit this as I go through, so apologies. So yeah, sorry, I did work on this originally with Dan Major, who was someone I was in contact with through it was an IRC channel or a forum, which kind of gives you a time frame. 2007 apparently is the date that I've put on here. And it does ring a bell of being from around that date. Specifically, the reason I remember this being 2007 is I remember working in a pub behind the bar and having and thinking of ideas for this game while I was pulling pints for old men, and sort of coming back from a long shift and going and writing stuff for this setting. So I knew that it was around this kind of time when I was working in pubs. So what it is the point here isn't for me to tell you that this is amazing, because it's not. It's got some real problems if I were to go back and revisit it today. But I think I've said before that when I started thinking about how I'm going to do this whole Bastionland thing and be doing streams and game design and stuff, I tried to think like, what do I want to do? And I think one thing that I think people are sometimes afraid to do online is people are worried about being imperfect. I think you've got to be perfect all the time. And anybody that's watched any of my streams knows that that's not the case with me. But also, like, I want to show that some of these old designs might be bad. There might be things in here that I look at and I think, oh God, I would never have like written that now. But you can either like shut that away and forget about it, or you can sort of look back on it as kind of a learning process. And that's going to be what I'm going to be doing today. Seeing what can be learned from this this relic of the past. So, Inheritance. I'm going to read the blurb in a dramatic fashion. Our stories tell of men that moved mountains, lifted the clay of the earth itself, god-kings that shaped empires with a gesture, adventurers driven to the lowest depths by the greatest greed. Some are just folk tales, legends, myths, but some of these men and women of Alatas are real and aspire to become legends in their own right. Those that possess this great power to shape their stories are known as inheritors, and the origin of their inheritance still debated in the great halls and backstreets. Warriors shrug off javelins impaled in their chests. Men with granite fists reduce walls to rubble, and messengers sprint a day's march in minutes. Jungles crawling with biting claws and poisoned fangs, burning desert that goes uncrossed, and blizzard-ridden ice peaks do little to stop them recovering artifacts spoken of only in cracked parchments stacked high in marble temples. So this is at a point where I hadn't discovered bullet points yet. I hadn't unlocked that skill on the skill tree that I've since put all of my skill points into. So it's basically, I am going to read through this. I know that I'm like delaying a lot here. I want to talk about like where this came from, because I thought with this game, where this came from is, at the time I really enjoyed like looking through like free RPGs, because I was really into the idea of role-playing games, and you know, I had my 3rd edition books and I played a little bit of 3rd edition online, but it was before I'd discovered anything relating to like OSR or even like indie games really. Like, I don't think I had discovered like Rissus at this point, which was another one that kind of was an important one for me. So weirdly, the game that kicked this off, and I will be thrilled if anybody else has heard of this game, it is a game called Power Game, which is a superheroic role-playing game system, designed by somebody whose name I've never had to say out loud, so I'm sorry, Mikko Kaupinen. And it's a superhero system, and it's still free, and the website's awesome. It's like going back in time. I don't mean any offense by that. I mean that in a good way. But it's like an old like GeoCities website almost. And it's meant to be like a simple superhero role-playing game. And it's weird because I'm not really that into like superheroes. Like, I don't read comic books really, and like I like the odd superhero film, but it's not like a genre that I get especially excited about. So I think what leapt out at me about this is that it is very simple in many ways, but everything is kind of based around power levels. Now, from what I know, this is kind of similar to how a lot of superhero games work, where you have this whole thing about like, well, is Superman strength PL6 or strength PL7, and you have loads of arguments about it on forums. But here, you know, you have a power level for whatever you're doing. So say your strength is 3, it means you're superhuman strength, but you're like at the lower end of that superhuman. And it's opposed rolls with a dice pool of d6s. If I roll 3 dice and you roll 2 dice, we compare. And if I beat you, it's a success. If I double your score, it's a critical. And that's kind of the basic system here at play. And I just liked that kind of, the fact that it had a unified core mechanic, which was like the hot shit at the time, was to have a unified mechanic. Like early 2000s, people were getting very excited about unified mechanics. But the problem is, it is simple, but the fact that everything is linked to these power levels meant that I wanted to do something with the system, but I didn't want to do a superhero game because it's not really what got me excited. So I thought, what's like superheroes? Like, I guess like Greek myth and like Hercules and stuff. So why don't I do a kind of heroic, mythic, kind of ancient Greek kind of feel setting, and see if I can bolt it onto this system. And that's where it started. So it's going to be more about like heroes fighting monsters and things like that. If you do fancy playing a reading power game, go for it. It is still free, like I say. But let's see what that actually means for inheritance. Design philosophy. So this was, let's be straight here, 24 years ago. That's not right at all. 14 years ago. 14 years ago, this was written. And for comparison, Into the Odd was released. I should know this by now. 2014, Into the Odd was released, I think. So this is like 7 years before Into the Odd. Design philosophy, simplicity. I agree. I'm still on board with this. And even at the time, I was on board with this. But I hadn't yet gone like all the way into like wanting to do like minimalism, because that kind of started when I discovered Searchers of the Unknown. I think was the first one that really got me thinking that way, and Rissus was another one. But here I was thinking simplicity, but I was thinking simplicity compared to like 3rd edition D&D. So it was probably, it's a bit more fiddly than I would like now. Consistency. The base mechanics of the system will be the base for all other mechanics. A unified task resolution mechanic was what I wanted, and it was seen as the height of fashion at the time. Freedom. Both character creation and gameplay should be enjoyable and simple processes, taking the focus away from dice and stats and instead providing the player and the DM with great possibilities. We will get to that, because providing your players and GM with possibilities is great, but sometimes it's not. And we will get to that when we get to character creation and when we look at like running the game. Expansion. See, I was already planning like the product line here. I had years of support planned for this if it was going to get a hardback release. So creating new content will be made as quick and easier process as possible. So we'll get back to that. So, like I said, it all tied down to these like power levels, and it's basically how many dice you're rolling to do that thing. So if you get hit and you take damage, you're rolling like your toughness would be the PL that you are rolling. And if you are toughness PL5, it means you're as tough as a tank or a bunker. Now, the problem here is the points of reference here don't really fit the theme. So we're talking about bunkers and tanks and nuclear weapon shelters, but this is meant to be a game of like mythic heroes in like a kind of ancient world with like spears and javelins and stuff. So it's tricky because you want to be able to, I don't know, I guess my idea was that I wanted to be able to distinguish between someone who is like, because I did still want that superhero influence, so someone who's like as tough as like Wolverine versus someone who's as tough as like Juggernaut. You want to be able to differentiate them in that kind of mindset. But the problem is there's not like a good ancient equivalent, because once you've had a reinforced structure, which I guess is like a stone fort or something, like where do you go from there? Like, I guess you could have like metal and stuff, but it kind of falls apart at these higher levels because you're referencing things that don't really exist in that world. And in the same way that in Into the Odd and Electric Bastion, I really wanted to have it so that every little bit of text in the book was telling you about the setting. So equipment list is like an obvious example. By putting in like battleships and stuff in here, I'm creating a kind of confusion. And it's not, this is an opportunity where I could have really hammered home the feel of the setting. If these were all things that made you think of like ancient, a sort of classical era, then that would have been a good opportunity, but missed that opportunity. Attributes are fine. As always, I have the classic mentor score that is like weirdly unused in the game. So it's like the dump stat, and I remember even at the time thinking like this is a bit of a problem. And I have like size, which is weird because, again, I guess from a superhero point of view, you want to have like large and small characters, but it doesn't really matter here, so I don't get why that's in there. And the problem we have is agility here is a bit of a god stat. And this is a problem in a lot of systems that try and make things... A lot of systems that try and worry too much about like being accurate rather than thinking about what's going to make for a good game. So being agile and being able to dodge, balance, jump, and like strike precisely, that is a very, very useful skill if you're doing a combat-based game. Compared to like just being tough enough to soak up the damage, it's much more useful. Same with like strength and like speed, I guess, as well, because speed will get you some extra actions if you roll well enough. But it's agility is just so useful for both offense and defense that it becomes it's definitely a problem that it exists in here. And I never did learn how to spell possess because I still make this typo regularly. So let's just zoom in a bit just to make our, it's been a long time since I wrote this, so my eyes have gotten worse. So yeah, as I spoke about the dice mechanic being kind of meh, and we can talk. I'm not going to talk about that for much longer because it's not that interesting. But yeah, it's dice pools. You're totaling them up and comparing them. So the one thing that I at the time didn't like was I thought it was a problem that like having a higher PL meant that you were much more like it was. A lot of it came down to who had the best score. There wasn't much swinginess in it. It was like if you had PL 5 for your strength or something, and you're attacking a target that's toughness PL 2, you're almost certainly going to cause a critical hit on them. And at first I thought, is that you want the underdog to still have a chance? But I think you do, but you can get that in other ways. You don't necessarily want the underdog to have a chance if they're just trying to fight this stronger opponent straight up. You want to give the underdog other ways that they can be clever and win in the fight. So I made the same typo twice. At that point, you can't call it a typo. That's just me not knowing how to spell. But I mean, possess is a ridiculous word. Like, if someone wants to change possess, I'll accept a synonym right now, and I will just use that instead. Yeah, you've got the actions and stuff are all kind of boring, and then we're getting to the setting, which is something I am interested in looking at into a bit more detail. I'm not going to read all of this out in my professional voice actor voice because you don't need to hear all this. But the setting was, I was looking back on it and I was thinking, with this setting, at first I thought, I'm sure it was terrible. And then I went back and looked through it, and I was actually like, this isn't as bad as I remembered it. But it's not great, and it shows, I think, some good intentions in that I was trying to make a setting that fit the game, rather a setting that served the game, rather than a game that served the setting. So I've spoken about this before with Electric Bastionland, that if the game of Into the Odd or Electric Bastionland didn't exist, then that setting wouldn't exist. I wouldn't have just made it to write novels or something like that. If I was going to do that, I could have made it completely different. But that world exists in the way it does, so it can serve that particular game. And I've not quite managed it here in this old game, but it's not as bad as I'd thought, because I don't know. The problem is it's a bit too grand. So I wanted to have like a big empire that were kind of like roughly the equivalent to like Rome, and then I wanted to have like another kingdom that were a bit more advanced, and I wanted to have some people that were in this like a jungle area and a desert area and an icy area, and I was trying to kind of cover all bases. And as such, it's that thing I spoke before about freedom. It does have a lot of freedom because it's saying like, yeah, but if you want to run a game in a kind of Arctic environment, then here's the place to do that. It's the frozen wastes of Umanar, apparently. If you want to be in the desert, I forget what the desert area is called, but we'll get to it. But yeah, there's a city in the desert, and there's all this desert area. But the problem is, it's none of it really sparks on its own. It relies on you having a cool idea for the desert, because once you actually get to the description of that area, there's not many hooks there. I wanted to try and make it all make sense, and I wanted to try and make it feel like it could have been real. And there is one really criminal example of that coming up that I will point out when I get to it, and I will shame my 22-year-old self for doing it. There's stuff about, like, again, I said before about wanting to be authentic and like own up to things that I've learned about. This whole thing is kind of weird about, like, I wanted to have that kind of Roman thing of, like, my limited understanding of, like, the Roman Empire is that, like, there was this identity of being, you were Romanesque, or you were Roman. And even if you were, whether you were from Germany or, well, modern day Germany rather, or from like Spain or Britain or like North Africa, there are still people living there that consider themselves Roman above their like other identities. And I wanted to kind of get a bit of that in here, but it's handled very clumsily. And it's one of those things where do the research, I would say, because I think I probably at the time did do some research, but not enough. Attacks and combat is just not that interesting. And one of the sort of lessons, one of the very, very first blog posts I ever did was called Lessons Learned from Inheritance. And this was a bit later on. This was in about 2009 when the blog started. And the lessons that I took from it, I think, looking back, aren't really the right lessons. So one of the things that I took was when you're having combat in this game, unless you've got like a special combat ability, really all your options are like attack. And I think there's like a power attack thing, but basically you're generally like attacking in combat. And there is a grapple system, of course there is, and there is like a disarming mechanism and all this kind of crap that you get in 3rd edition D&D, because that was my food at the time. But I think I played a few playtests and combat felt like a bit of a drag, and the lesson I took from that was, well, you should have more fun options in combat, like abilities, like what 4th edition was starting to do at the time. But obviously with Electric Bastionland and Into the Odd, you don't really have special attacks in that, other than if you've got an oddity or an arcanum. You are generally just like saying, I attack. But in that game, combat is fast, and the opponents are interesting enough that just choosing to attack them can often be an interesting choice. And there's usually like enough going on around that the interesting part isn't how am I going to attack this monster. The interesting part is, are we going to attack this monster, or are we going to try and talk to it, or are we going to try some weird thing where we like use a firebomb and position ourselves in a certain way. It's not about saying which of these 6 at-will abilities do I use and which one's going to create a combination, because that's not the only way to make combat interesting and compelling. So I should go over each bit of the setting. So Epitane, like I say, that was kind of an empire of contrasts. So it's like the empire that spans like a number of different cultures and has kind of like absorbed them all in. So there's a little bit of like internal strife. And yeah, they're like kind of the Roman Empire, I guess. And then Vara. So I thought giving them like a long, semi-unpronounceable name was like, makes it feel more real. But it's just stupid, and it's just like rubbish, like world building stuff that like just makes me cringe. It's the Empire of the Eternal King. So it's like the other empire. They're in like a kind of Cold War, I guess. Zero's theory, or Zero's theory, is asking, is Electric Bastion meant to be played in Theatre of Mind or on a grid, or either? Either is the short answer, but I generally do Theatre of the Mind, and then I'll sketch something out if I need to. So Vara is like kind of the... Vara is like the slightly more advanced empire, and they're like tucked off in the mountains. I guess part of the idea was like if your typical like fantasy dwarves were humans to some extent. I kind of like that they had this religion that was based around like, wait, hang on, am I remembering this right? There is a god for everyone, with a sprawling pantheon for every profession. So no, this isn't the one where they have a cool religion. That's someone else. But yeah, it's just boring. Like saying that they're like polytheistic and then just saying like, yeah, every profession has an appropriate religion. You're like, oh, so if I go to stay in like a hostel, there's going to be a patron deity of travelers or something, or of like hosts. But it doesn't go any further than that, and there's nothing that gives you like a spark. Like if this was something I was doing now, you'd have like, I'd want to give each of those gods a little twist. So it's not just like, oh, this person is the god of the hearth, and that's all they are. I'd like maybe say that in the same way that like councils and stuff work in Bastion, maybe like a god will have like multiple domains, and they're kind of like slightly contradictory with each other, and it kind of brings together parts of society that wouldn't normally interact. There's a lot of combat modifiers, cover, and like, oh yeah, something about moving. Do we need this? So at least I'm trying to like strip out rules that we don't need. Umanar, the Frozen Protectorate. So it's just a load of like isolated like fortresses up in the Arctic bit, I think. Oh yeah, okay, you know what? At the time, this was long before, I mean, I can't remember, I don't know when Game of Thrones was published, the first book, but I had never read it, and I wasn't really aware of it at the time, I would say. It's long before the TV series, which is obviously where illiterate people like me got on board with it. And it's weirdly close, because yeah, there were these Grawl men, which are like the wild the wild people, I guess, that live out in the real Arctic bit of it, and then Umanar is like a load of walled cities. Yeah, hang on, when was A Game of Thrones published? Was it later than it can't have been later than 2007. It was a long time ago, wasn't it? But I could have had George R.R. Martin here for IP, stealing my IP. So we have things like evading, pulling punches, ramming, but this is the kind of situation where normally I would say, so yes, it makes sense to know that if you have a big, heavy character and they want to just ram into an enemy, then yes, you might logically think, well, we should have a rule for that, because that's different than just like hitting someone. But the fact is, by ramming someone, you're kind of trying to achieve the same thing as if you're hitting them. The fact that you're just charging into them rather than swinging a weapon at them is kind of academic. What matters is that you are making an attack, really. So this is why with like Into the Odd, if someone asked me to do that, if someone asked me in the game, I want to shoulder barge into them, I wouldn't say, well, let's get out the ramming subsystem. I would say, let's think about what are you actually trying to achieve. And if you are just trying to damage them, then it's an attack, and we can take it from there. Apparently, A Game of Thrones was mid-90s, so he's fine. Shield bash, grappling. Can you tell that I was reading 3rd edition D&D at the time? Dual wielding. And here we go. That surely the crown jewel of any role-playing game system, the grappling rules. And it is very 3rd edition. You know, there's a role to oh no, there's not a role. So let's go through it, because I know this is what people want. People want to hear me describe this grappling system in great detail. So if I try to, or rather, if you try to grapple me, I can either try and dodge, in which case you roll against my either agility or speed, or I try and overpower you, which means I use my strength to defend myself. Now, the problem here is that's giving the it's just like a non-choice, because one of those options will be better for me, depending on what our strength, agility, and speed scores are. And it's not an interesting choice. All it's doing is making me ask you, sorry, what's your agility, and what's your strength, and what's mine? And I'm just running the numbers, and then I choose the better option. So it's just like, I get why it's there, because you would think, yeah, with grappling you want to be able to have it so that, you know, Juggernaut can just push you away, but the Flash can just run away from you. But I don't think this is the right way of doing that. And then they're down, and you can like pin them down, and you've got them grappled, and it's terrible. Disarming is kind of crap unless you have the disarming, like, they're called good things in this. Unless you have like that perk, then there's not much point in trying to disarm someone. And if you do, then you're often like better disarming someone than fighting them. And again, it's kind of like a weird non-choice, because if you're fighting somebody that's using a weapon and you have a good chance of disarming them, then doing it could like kind of end the combat. So it's weird, because and I'm aware that disarming is like a thing that's into the odd, but I don't know, I've never quite been able to come to a satisfactory ruling on like disarming, because I feel like it can just be like unsatisfying, and it can create this weird non-choice. You can throw weapons that aren't intended to be thrown. To be fair, I think for the fact that it takes up one line, that's kind of nice, because it allows you to throw your sword as like a desperation move. Called attacks. It's got all the classic, overcomplicated RPG trademarks in here. Hello. Additional combat rules. Critical hits or damage cannot be dealt by an unarmed attacker who is not specially trained. Why is that rule there? Was I concerned that like unarmed fighting was going to be too good? Ordinary weapons count as 1 PL lower against objects and structures. Stationary objects are automatically hit in melee. A character engaged in melee cannot fire a ranged weapon unless hit. So this is just like stuff where I'm like, well, we need to have this, we need to have this, we need to have this. And I kind of wonder if now I would rather have guidelines for how to adjudicate this sort of thing, rather than give you like 4 specific situations that I'd thought of where you might need to make a ruling a certain way. Instead, if you set expectations right and give the GM like the right tools to make these rulings, then it can kind of, you're getting them to make these rulings themselves. And then when something unexpected comes up, they can do it themselves. Wide Lun, a nation of slaves. I'm sure this is handled sensitively. So, the concept with this nation was that it's kind of like a weird... It's obviously like awful, and I would not write this now. But the idea is that it was kind of like... What's the best thing? I guess kind of like in... I haven't read the book, I'm afraid. But in like the Starship Troopers film... Again, I'm massively illiterate. In like the Starship Troopers film, you've got like this idea that you have to like earn your citizenship by like doing like military service or something. This was kind of like a nation built around that idea. But it's pitched a little bit too positively, I think. I think you could make this work if it was written with the right tone. But instead, it's just kind of reads a little bit like, yeah, citizens should have to earn every right and freedom for themselves through service, which is not really not a view that I adhere to, but it's written really badly. But yeah, they're the ones that live in the jungle, and yeah, it's not good. Social situations. So this is something that I would not have rules for now. The most common social situation that will require dice rolls is persuasion. So this could be giving information, lowering prices, backing down from a fight, or joining you in a task. You make opposed rolls that always begin at PL1 each, because there's no charisma score, but I still wanted to have that same like core mechanic, apparently. Resisting seduction or interrogation. Yeah, this is not stuff that I would have in the game now. I would not have a seduction roll. I think that's plain to say. But like I said at the start, I'm going to give that disclaimer again. I think you can pretend that you've never written anything stupid like this, or you can go back and say, look, okay, I definitely wouldn't do that now. This was 14 years ago, and I like to think I've at least learned something from since then. So that there's like a detailed situation for like if you're trying to barter with someone. I don't know. I don't dislike this kind of like opposed roll to see what their reaction is, but I kind of just prefer a reaction roll. Climbing, jumping, balancing, and other acrobatics. So you obviously, you don't need to necessarily... So the fact that I've got here, like, difficulty levels for walking across a beam a foot wide and then walking across a beam an inch wide. Is that going to come up in your game? Do I need to have that? No. Okay, Teldan. So this is like the market that became a city-state. So it's kind of like just, again, it's just dead derivative of stuff. It's like an independent trading city-state. I guess it's like a less interesting Venice. Yeah, it's less interesting than like the real life thing that I was knocking off for it. So yeah, this is the problem. There's a lot of stuff here that is just like, you take the basic idea and then I didn't go any further with it. So it's a independent like city-state between these two empires, and it's maintained its independence, and it's kind of like a crossroads for both empires, and it doesn't go any further than that. It's just like, yeah, well, there's lots of money there. It's a very wealthy place. The real power in Teldan is held by those who hold the most influence. These are commonly people that hold the most coins. So it just doesn't get any... I guess that there are four halls, like 4 guilds that are like competing. So that in itself isn't interesting. If I'd gone a bit further and said what those 4 guilds were, that would have been maybe like that could have made it work. But I think as it stands, it's just like another one that's just a little bit too boring. When can we play? Says that as a design student, they were told a finished design isn't when you can't add anything else, it's when you can't remove anything else. In case it's not obvious from the things that I've done, I'm a big fan of that statement. I think there's a place for like maximalist design and like just adding stuff in, but when you're looking at like the core of your game and like how the rules work, I definitely agree to that. Because you could argue that Electric Bastion didn't need 100 failed careers. Well, more than that, 112, I think. I forget how many are in the final one. Yeah, it didn't need 112. But in doing that, it opened up some other options for like how to present the setting through these and having all this artwork and just having that richness to it. So I think I agree when you're talking about like the design of how the game plays, 100%. Extreme environments. So when you're walking through the snow and you haven't got a coat. It's okay, but it gives me like massive flashbacks to something which I'll grab now. This is the AD&D Wilderness Survival Guide, and when I got this, I found it really cheap somewhere, and I got this and like the Dungeoneer's Guide. The Dungeon Survival Guide is just kind of a bit of a boring slog, but the Wilderness Survival Guide is kind of so... can I say bad? It's so different to what I like in a role-playing game that I actually found it just really funny. And my favourite bit in here, it's from 1986, so I'm willing to cut them a lot of slack. It's got different percentages for foraging success, which is fine. I'm hoping I can find it because I can remember what I'm looking for, but I'm hoping I can find the actual table because it just made me laugh for like a ridiculous amount of time the first time I saw it. This is a good example. So in this AD&D supplement, you have I don't think you'll be able to see this, but I can read it out to you. It's table 4 is temperature effects, and you have temperatures going from -40 up to 120. I'm assuming this is Fahrenheit. And you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You've got 13 different temperature bands, and the effect that it has on your strength, your dexterity, your constitution, your land move, and your attack rolls. And it says something about a GM that's going to like be looking at the temperature of your environment in that much detail. Where they're like, well, is it 90 degrees Fahrenheit right now, or is it more like 100 degrees Fahrenheit in this this desert we're exploring? But the thing that made me laugh more than anything else is there's one about like hailstones and how much damage a hailstone will do based on like something like the strength of the storm and the size of the hailstones. And the idea that you will be playing AD&D like in 1984 and your GM will come out with his book and they will tell you that, yeah, your characters are going through a hailstorm and your character could potentially die from being hit by a hailstone. I don't know why. That made me laugh more quite a lot. So yeah, I do have rules for like extreme environments in Electric Bastion Land, but it's more like a guidance thing. It's kind of built into something else. Like there's a reference to it in how luck rolls work, that you can have a kind of survival roll function in there. And there's a reference to it like in the rules for being deprived. So if you're in the Arctic and you haven't got the right gear, you are probably deprived. But I would rather use like an existing subsystem and say, here's an example of how to use this, rather than have a new system for going through the desert. Now, how many times have I boasted about how my games don't need timelines and maps? That's for like the Forgotten Realms and that kind of setting. So here we have the history of Alatas, which can be broken down into 3 main time periods that would be suitable for a campaign. So I'm already like, you know, you've got to settle into the canon and like you got to decide which era is your campaign set. So yeah, the birthing age or the age of sand. Again, why am I giving things 2 different names? It's like trying to read the Silmarillion and they're like, oh, this guy was called Elethor, but the elves called him Galumpion and the dwarves called him Krachacha. Yeah, so we're not going to do that. There's a weirdly long list of poisons and their effects, and they'll have like ongoing effects that they require quite a lot of like. I mean, I guess they're like kind of impactful, and I guess poison is kind of like a thing I think of when I think of like these like mythic settings. Like I don't think of it so much with like D&D, but when I think about something like if you're going for like a kind of ancient world thing, poison somehow feels like it fits more. But this is kind of ridiculous. Religions. So they're just boring because I haven't gone into details actually. So let's look at this, the Umanean religion, who are like the ice people. So they have a pantheon of gods all considered to be siblings. What a fresh concept. There's no dominant god. And balanced worship is considered important. Laurel is the safe home. She grants protection to all the homes. Voldy, the fire. She taught them how to use fire. Duban is the blizzard, a fearful figure whose awesome power is to be respected. Perelmin, flesh and bone, signifies the importance of good health and eating. Perman is suffering and endurance. He challenges those who need to become strong so they can protect themselves. So they're just boring. Like, I guess you've just got like, they're just all kind of knockoffs of like a Greek god, I guess. And they just don't go any further than like the core thing of like, you would expect the blizzard god to be a fearful figure whose awesome power is to be respected. But what if the Blizzard god was actually like the god of... I'm doing this off the top of my head, but what if a good thing is to just take something that doesn't fit and try and make it fit. So what if the Blizzard god was like a fearful figure, but they were also the god of, like, I don't know, stories or something? Like, how can you make that fit? And it's like, oh, is it because when there's a blizzard, you all have to hunker down inside, and it's a time when people traditionally tell, like, stories and, like, pass on knowledge? Just anything that gives it a bit of a twist. Amaranthian religion is based around eternal conflict between two gods. You know what, this is kind of cool, and this is, I'm not saying it's great, but, like, compared to the other ones, this is at least like a kind of a novel religion, if it's got like two warring gods that are like always like at a stalemate, but at some point one of them will win and will like come down and start wrecking stuff. So the Amaranthians prepare for this by building everything to last and storing artifacts deep inside vaults. So I guess that's something. Mass combat, of course. You've got to have that. And I did like the idea that you could have these heroic characters that are like fighting whole armies, but I just didn't go far enough with it. So it's like this weird tacked on thing. I mean, I guess a comparison here, which is something I did read about quite a bit at the time, would be Exalted, which I don't hear that much about now. I don't know if it's just because like I'm hearing about other games instead. But at the time, there was a lot about Exalted going on. I have gotten better at knowing when to say effect and affect. I can't leave that. I am going to make an edit. Yeah, so Exalted was a big thing at the time, and that was like, you know, big kind of super powered heroes, essentially. And it was, that had like these kind of like, the way that your hero could like fight entire armies and stuff, but it was a massively complicated system. So one of the goals was to try and hack into that a little bit and have that kind of thing on a much tighter mechanical level. Formations. Well, I really did, you know, I really did go full on with this. Because you've got to have the shield shell if you're doing like Roman era stuff. Land movement speeds. Oh god, I'd forgotten about this. So this is like, obviously at the time I was like, this is going to be. I mean, I'm being a bit like. There's a bit of hyperbole about how important I thought this setting was. Like, I thought at best this would be something I could make and print out and maybe get some people to play it with me. I wasn't even considering doing anything with this. I just wanted it to, at the time I was just happy to like get a game running and with a system that I liked. So I was making this purely for myself, really. I had no delusions that anyone else was going to pick it up and play it. So in making this world, I was like, okay, so it's an ancient world, but I was like, how can I make it different to ancient like Greece or Rome or, you know. And one of the things that I decided to do was there are no horses in this world, and that is such a rubbish unique selling point. Because it's like, do you hate horses? There's no horses in this world, so there's no like cavalry. And I think part of the reason was, in fact, I'm remembering now, there were no horses because I thought, well, chariots are cool, right? In theory, chariots are cool. I think in practice, chariots are probably less cool. But like the Warhammer version of chariots, which are just like these death machines that crash into, you know, units of spearmen and like send them flying and slice people in half. Like that's cool. They're less interesting when they're the boring like skirmishy things that I think they probably were more in reality. So there's no horses. Instead, there are just different types of dog. And there are dogs that are specially bred for pulling chariots. And I think that's what these are. We'll get to like the monster list. Cavalda. or a Sildota. Oh god, it's coming back to me now. This is like the classic. This is probably the biggest thing that's changed is like I would never allow myself to invent the word Cavalda or Sildota these days. If it was like a chariot horse, I would call it like a draft hound or something. I would use like real words so that at least you can read it and try and get a glimpse of it from the context. But if you're reading this paragraph here, unless you've also read the monster section, you've got no idea what a Cavalda is that's pulling a wagon, or a Sildota. Wait, no, hang on. So a Sildota is... It's not a sailboat, but... I'm looking forward to seeing what a Sildota is. Yeah, call them riding dogs, draft dogs. Just call them their name. And don't try and make up, a new word. Travel and trade. Oh, here we go. So we're going to learn now. The most common form of transport in Alatas is moving by foot, as there are no horses to be found. Goods are more commonly transported by riverboats or wagons pulled by cavaldas, ox-like beasts of burden. Oh, so there are like oxes. In the northern deserts, sildotas, huge lizards, are ridden by several riders at once. Epitan nobles commonly make use of hound-drawn chariots. So there are different breeds of dogs that we'll get to that are like specialist. But Sildota as a lizard and Cavalda as an ox, why would it's like a weird restriction to give myself, where I say no, there's no ox in this world. So if a player's like, can we go and buy an ox? I say no, you can't buy an ox. You can buy a Cavalda instead. They're like, is Pepsi okay instead of Coke? Like, is a Cavalda okay? We don't do oxen here. Now here is something that I remember thinking was a good thing at the time. As we go through, I'm just going to get like angrier at my old self. So trade is centered around bartering, which I think is good. I think I still like the idea of like having trade be less focused on like raw money and have it just be on like, what have you got to trade? But you've got two common currencies are based around bronze and silver coins, both of which can be clipped into 5 kings. Oh, sorry. So in Epitan, the coins can be clipped into 5 kings. But the Varan currency uses bronze suns, silver moons, and gold tiles. And then there's like conversion rates here. And it's just rubbish. Like, I don't want to have to say to a player like, yes, the merchant hands you 6 silver kings that clutter into your hand. And they're like, what is this? Like, how much is this to give me a single thing? And I've gotten like more annoyed with this as I've gone on, because in Into the Odd I had pennies, shillings, and guilders, which were just like 100 increments. So like 100 pennies was a shilling and 100 shillings was a guilder, which doesn't make any sense for how shillings have worked in the past. But I thought, I'm not dealing with like non-metric currency, I guess. Non-decimal currency, I should say. So then even that was like a bit too fancy for me. So with Electric Bastion, it's just pounds and pence. It's just what I'm using day to day anyway. When can we play? Asks, is there a humanoid dog race? No, I think this game is like, this setting is like all human, which again was like probably another like lashing out at D&D really, because I was like, well, if you can have different cultures of human, maybe that's more interesting, which I kind of get. But yeah, it's so here we go. Character creation. So should we make one? We'll get our notepad out. All characters begin with PL1 for all attributes. Now, this will be a good time to remind me what the attributes are. I think I can remember. I think it's strength, toughness, agility, speed, will, and then it was like size, but that doesn't really count. So we're going to be an inheritor. So we can spend 12 PLs on super attributes and powers and take 6 good things. We'll worry about good things later. They're like little perks. The one thing I did like is that this is directly lifted from Power Game, but it has these different levels, so you can just play as like a gifted person, which is like kind of the X-Men level, where like, you know, Cyclops is kind of just a guy that might be good at a lot of things, and then they have this one special ability. A heroic normal is, I guess, like your Batman, where they don't have any superpowers, but they're like, they have a lot of talents. And then why would you ever want to just make an average person? That would be terrible. Hero points? Okay, we won't think about that. So, super attributes. So we have 12 PLs to spend, and we could just say, well, these are all starting at PL1. So we could just say we're going to spend 5 power levels to raise to say we've got super will PL5. So you can just do it that way. But then you can also spend it on like special abilities. Now the problem I've got here is it's kind of like the GURPS thing, where it's a very free-form type of character creation. Like, there are some examples given, I think. Sample powers, yeah. You know, it's not a bad list of sample powers. And you could just choose from here. But it relies on you thinking of your own concept. And I would now... Oh, dependent. Look at this spelling. Awful. I mean, I'm pretending that I've gotten better at spelling, but I think in reality I just use spell check a lot more. So, yeah, you've got to come up with your own concept yourself. There's no like table to roll on, and you're not getting any inspiration from like randomness. You're just thrown down. It's like, right, make a hero, make an inheritor of Alatas, and you're like, I don't even know what this world is. Like what? Are you from Epitan? Are you from Vara? Come on, make a decision. Like, I don't give a shit about these places. Like, I've just sat down. Like, why are you asking me this? If you could have like almost like a life path system, could be kind of cool. That would help like get you invested with the setting without having to just read through it. So if someone wants to give me like a concept of, well, you know what, I'm going to take when can we play's humanoid dog race idea, and we're going to have like a dog based hero. So he's not going to be like a dog man, but he is going to have like a dog themed power set. So, what's the deal with dogs? Let's think. I guess we want to make him like quite tough and strong and agile. So he's like, you know, he's got the physicality of like a dog human hybrid. So we'll do super strength, PL. Could do PL2. Yeah, toughness PL2. I'm not going to write super every time, because even that in itself is like a weird addition to this game, because super is not a word I would use to describe, like, I wouldn't say that Heracles had super strength. Like, you'd use a better word. You'd use like heroic strength or something, I guess. And agility, PL2. So that's going to give us like a nice rounded out set of like physical stats. And then you're sort of free to make up your own things. So you could, obviously with a dog you want to have like scent, PL3, or 4. I mean, I think 4 is as high as you can go. PL5 is as high as you can go with a starting one. So you can just make up stuff like this, like scent PL4, dog command PL3. So he's like the alpha dog, I guess. We've already gone over our limit, so we'll keep our scent super high, and we'll do dog command PL1, PL2. So we've just made one very quickly, and this is kind of redundant. You don't need to have all that. So this is our I'm trying to think of like a dog-based name that is. I'm sorry, Mechon, but Super Dogman is not quite doing it for me. I'll take it. No, because we did say like heroic dogman is probably more thematically appropriate. So the way that your powers work is the PL will relate to like the power level of it, and let's jump ahead slightly. So we're on page 20. Let's get to the examples of power levels. So here we go. So here are all the power levels for different things. So the fact that we have toughness PL2 means we are an incredibly resilient normal human. So it's like the equivalent of having body armor. But if we're looking at something like scent, we're probably talking about range. No, area of effect, I guess, really. Because range is like when it's a single... I don't know if I'm using vector in the right way here, but like a single thing. Area effect is like scent is covering an area. So we have super scent over roughly 100 meters. So that's kind of cool. But the problem is, with these tables, is this is where it starts to fall down, because you have to keep coming back and referring to these, or you have to have them on a reference sheet in front of you. And I just don't really like it. So I guess if you had like super scent PL4, it means you can smell things over roughly 100 meters, which is not that impressive in itself. But I think you would then say that you would roll 4 dice against, say, someone who's trying to hide, against whatever they're rolling to hide. I don't know what they'd be rolling to try and like hide their scent. Who knows? So it's a bit of a janky system, but you know, I can still see the appeal. Now I've just noticed the time, and we are doing this in much more detail than I was hoping for this like forgotten old system. So good things are like perks, so it could just be like a skill, or charisma is represented in this way instead. Mecham says, can we please make this guy into a Grimlight horror when it's all done? Like a Dogman horror? I don't know. So these are your PLs. Not PLs. GTs, your good things. And again, I used good things because it was from Power Game, but I should have renamed it, because like it just doesn't fit the theme of the epic, mythic feel like a good thing. It sounds very modern. So things like knockout blow. So you can knock out people. You can disarm people when you're unarmed. +1 to grappling rolls. Wow. They're very much like feats from 3rd edition D&D. Now, what I want to get to... Oh, and this is like the classic GURPS thing, is you have bad things. So you can take these to get more points to spend. But in reality, you'd probably just take like poverty, because you're going to go out and get some treasure anyway. So it doesn't really matter that you're starting the game poor. Or maybe you'll take age, because it doesn't really matter if people think you're a bit old. If you're also like a badass, it doesn't really matter. So yeah. Oh, the Isorn and the Grolmen, the wild cultures. The 2 people that don't fit into the civilized nations. Again, I'm sure this is going to be handled with the greatest of respect. So you've got desert people, and you've got like ice people. And it doesn't get much more interesting. They ride around in big lizards. Grolmen are barely human. Possess. Look at how many times. Take a shot every time I misspell the word possess. Icy as well. And again, where does it... What's interesting about these Grolmen? They're like wild people that live in the ice, and they catch animals and eat them. It's just not interesting. You get regional bonuses. So if you come from Burson... I've already forgotten which one that is. Oh, they're like the people that live in the cold woods rather than the cold forts. You might be able to get like survival cold or stealthy. XP. How did XP work? I've got no idea. If the DM feels that player has made a worthwhile achievement, they may be given an experience point. These may be spent on a number of things. So you just get it when the GM wants to give you one. Idea. Weapons advancement characters. That's a good idea. That fits with the whole mythic theme of like your sword is powerful because it's grown with your power. Trade, basic equipment. I spent so much time on like balancing these weapons so that they were like all interesting, and like an axe had to be different than a sword. Like, and the way it works is like battle axes are better at like damaging shields, but great swords are like better all round. And it's stuff that now I wouldn't worry about, but at the time I was like I've got to do it. I've got to make sure that a knife is different to a club, and a great axe is different to a great axe and Warhammer are the same, which probably tore me apart at the time. Miscellaneous. Garrote. Well, garrote's a big thing in ancient times. In ancient times. Hundreds of years before the dawn of history. I don't... there's like fancy weapons. Okay, right. Getting hit by a ballista or a rock thrower, always good. There should have been more of this stuff. There should have been more like heroic stuff, like you're getting shot at with ballistas, rather than grappling with some guard. And then their weapons all have tags. Artifacts, they're not very... you know what? Some of these are actually all right, because even back then I did like magic items that were interesting, but they all kind of have like a mechanical thing. Yeah, they're not that good. I was wondering if there were like a hidden gem in here to be used as like oddities or arcana. Running the game. Okay. I haven't read this section. So assorted stolen tips. Think big, play small. Epic happenings needn't be mechanically complicated. Just focus on the parts that directly affect the characters. Okay, makes sense. Like don't sweat the entire world. Focus on the character. Don't roll, think. So there's the seed of like the way that I would go on to run games. Situations, not plots. Yeah, show don't tell. Allow heroes. Everything has an impact. This isn't bad advice. I wonder if this was added in later on, if I'm being honest. Because there's a lot in there that's like weirdly similar to what's in Electric Bastion. Fleshing out things. If something needs fleshing out, it should be given 2 interesting points and a summary. You need 3 bullet points. Come on, that's the way. But I see what it's saying. It's saying like you could say something is X but Y. For example, the guard is stocky but agile. That's not a good like 2 things to choose. But yeah, I get what I'm going for there. And you give them like a summary. This isn't a good way of doing it, but I do like the idea of something is X but Y. So if you want to buy a sword, they'll say like, well, this sword is incredibly ornate, but it's very expensive. Just give it a positive and a negative. It's like a real basic thing, but it does go a long way. Opponents and allies. Right, here we go. So this is like our bestiary. And I think after this, we'll try and wrap things up, because I do have some work to do today, believe it or not. So we have like our sample characters, I guess, which are kind of like slightly uninspiring heroes. And then you've got like your basic kind of encounters. Where are the dogs? Show me the dogs. Oh, okay, I see. We aren't in the creatures and monsters section yet. An insithnid is a gigantic sea creature. Did I probably just want to call it like an ichthyosaur, but not? I didn't want to be that on the nose. Because I think you either call it an ichthyosaur or you call it like a sea monster. Like, just use that name. Like, what are people calling it? And if you want to use the fancy name, use a real fancy name, so at least you're kind of learning something. Vault guards, okay. Here we go. It's a Lantane Javelard. They are the Epitan Warhound. Yeah, so there was like a Warhound, and then a Turalard was a hunting dog, a Stockard was a fighting dog, and a Maillard was a chariot hound. And of course they had speciality chariot drawing. But when are you going to roll that? Like, if you want to have a chariot drawn by these dogs, just let the dogs pull the chariot. Like, you don't need to roll. It's like what they're literally what they are bred to do. And again, acute senses, smell and hearing. So I guess that makes sense, because you might be trying to hide from some guards with a dog that are trying to sniff you out. The Hydra, that's a bit on the nose. Why did I deem it fine that there is the Hydra, but I can't have an ichthyosaur? I've got to have the Insithnid. We've got so many made up names here. A Kipila is a mountain cat. An Okatak is a big mountain cat. Again, just call it a tiger, or like, if you want to like make it more interesting, call it a such and such tiger, or a such and such cat. Lemero, the great frostworm. I don't mind the something weird. That's like kind of where I'll allow it, because it's a name. Like the Thalanoda. I remember this thing. It's a giant enemy crab. And the Thalanoda, I remember having an encounter with this thing, and it was just an absolute slog, because it's like very heavily armored, but it has low agility. So agility was used to like hit, and then strength was used to cause damage, which is a classic thing people do when they think they've like outsmarted D&D, because they're like, strength for me to hit with my sword? No, it should be, you should have a separate thing for precision. But what you end up with is monsters like this that aren't agile, and they're just very bad at hitting. So I remember this was just like whiff, 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 whiff. Both sides were just whiffing. Like, the characters would be hitting this thing, but they couldn't penetrate the armor. This thing would just be like not hitting the characters because they were too good at defending. But the name, I think, is fine. But this is a good example, actually, because you can kind of fall into this trap a little bit with Bastionland and Into the Odd. If you give a monster like armor 3, which is the most you can really give it, and you give it loads of hit points, you kind of fall into this same pattern. So my advice is always like, if you're going to give it lots of armor, maybe you don't have to give it loads of hit points. Or if you're going to give it a really high strength score, basically pick 2 of the 3. You've got strength, hit points, armor, and if you give it high scores in all 3, you're just setting yourself up for a bit of a slog if they do try and fight it, even when they've got like specialist weapons to do so. Oh, so I will call something a Shadow Hound, but I won't call something a Chariot Hound. Okay, I get it. Namori, they were like these big lions, yeah, scaly lion of legend. And it's weird because literally this week I wrote something that hinted at like a big scaly lion. It wasn't called a Namori. It was called a Leozard, which is kind of terrible in itself, but it was pitched as like in fiction, like writing. I'm not saying this is what it's called, like this is what these people are calling it. And I'm now thinking like, well, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm seeing this same person staring back at me. I'm like, oh, have I learned? Am I still making the same mistakes? Having a crocodile is always good. A young mountain bear. Okay, right, okay. And then we've got the power levels. And I think that's it. Let's see. So yeah, that is Inheritance. I apologise, but I also acknowledge that it's good to learn from these things. So yeah, that's that. If you have enjoyed this podcast, I'm trying to do 2 things at once because I haven't prepared the next bit that I wanted to talk about. So I'm having to talk while I'm doing something. But thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this stream, I normally do one on Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. GMT, and I normally do the extra one at some other point in the week. It's often on a Friday around this time. If you have enjoyed it, feel free to go to patreon.com/Bastionland, and you can help support these streams. Speaking of podcast, I might as well say while I'm here that the new series of the Bastionland podcast is up. That's on anchor.fm/Bastionland, but it's going out to other services as well, like Google Podcasts and stuff. There will be a new episode on Monday. Episode just gone is with Gav Thorpe of Games Workshop fame. So yeah, and for everything else, as always, you can go to bastionland.com. And until next Tuesday, when I will be doing something completely different, that's all for now. So bye for now.